We use it to bathe, we use it to cook, it hydrates us and provides for us. There's not a single facet of life that doesn't depend on it to some degree. Water. It's an integral part of the endurance and survival of humans, animals, and the earth beneath our feet. Yet, despite its importance, it's rendered inaccessible in communities all over the planet. Whether due to drought, contamination, infrastructural complications, or countless other issues, water is unjustly treated as a luxury, not a human right. Author and environmental educator Nancy Castaldo deconstructs this problem, examining it from the inside out in her new middle grade nonfiction book.
I focused on lead in Flint, Michigan, because that was the large story that everybody really knew, but then also included a short piece on the fact that it's also happening in Arizona and it's happening in New Jersey, and kind of putting it out there so that the main focus may be in Flint, but that it's happening in many other places as well.
Written with first-hand accounts from those directly affected by water insecurity, When the World Runs Dry, Earth's Water in Crisis takes a look at the situation under a microscope.
What I try to do in all of my books is really try to round out so that many areas and many people are having their voices heard and having their stories told.
And offers ways for families to take action in their everyday lives. Hi, my name is Sandra Salib. I'm a teen interviewer for the St. Louis County Library, and today I will be talking with the amazing Nancy Castaldo about her new book, When the World Runs Dry. Nancy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, and thanks for having me today. I'm so happy to be here. I have been writing children's books for many years now, and mostly for middle grade and teen audiences. I'm speaking from the traditional lands of the Mohican people in upstate New York. And my latest book is called When the World Runs Dry, and it's all about water issues.
So the book starts off with a quote that says, "Only when the last stream has been poisoned will you realize you cannot eat money." Can you tell me about why you chose that quote and kind of what it means to you?
It's an interesting quote that I actually have heard many times before, but while I was researching the book, I was walking through the streets of California and I saw a large display, a graffiti art near Venice Beach, and this was painted on it. And I thought, oh, that really makes a difference. It's sort of like water all around, but not a drop to drink. You know, all of these kind of quotes, I think, are so meaningful to this age that we're living in, that what matters is not so much the belongings that we have, the cars that we could drive, but if we don't have like fresh food and fresh water, we have a lot of trouble. So it doesn't matter sometimes how much money we have. Sometimes it's just about the necessities, the resources of life that we need. So that's why I included it. And I was hoping that my readers would actually think about that while they're reading the book and come back to that maybe as they're reading the book and see if it's meaningful to them.
So this is such a specific topic to write about. What inspired you to write about it?
It is specific. My books are inspired by many different things, and a lot of them start way back when I was a child and what was important to me when I was a child. Sometimes then they resurface. This is one of those topics that resurfaced. My mom was involved in protecting our water supply in the area that I grew up in when I was a child. But I was in middle school at the time, and it sort of laid dormant for all those years. And then I was researching a book called The Story of Seeds, which dealt with food security. And that's another young adult novel. And I kept coming across stories where water and agriculture and food security and water security mixed. And as I was doing that, of course, once you start looking at these things, It seemed like water was in the news every day. And I thought that I needed to explore it more in a book.
So, what do you hope to accomplish by publishing the book? Like, who do you hope to reach?
Well, I know that when I am hearing little news bits all the time on the news, these little stories, you get a little glimpse of a story, but you don't really hear all of the stuff around the story, all of the other details, all the other information. So I felt that sometimes, like, I know I'm bombarded with all of these things, and I thought my readers are probably feeling the same way, that everything comes at you in the news in little news bits. So what I wanted to do with this book was really take those little news bits, that what you hear, and flesh them out and give some background to them and some more space to them, so that my readers can feel informed about all of these different things that are going on and see them in a context that is clear and relevant. And then I hope that it spurs them to be inspired to action and help protect our water supply. Our fresh water is something that impacts all of us. So I was hoping that that would move them to do that.
So, you include case studies from all across the country and even the world. What was your process for choosing which case studies to include?
It's sometimes in the research project can get almost like there's too much out there, and it's a matter of so many places are suffering from drought. So many places are suffering from PFOAs or lead poisoning or whatever the issue is. What I try to do in all of my books is really try to round out so that that many areas and many people are having their voices heard and having their stories told. So I try to put as much as I can in and make sure that each of these areas is represented and different. So, for example, I focused on lead in Flint, Michigan, because that was the large story that everybody really knew, but then also included a short piece on the fact that it's also happening in Arizona and it's happening in New Jersey, and just kind of putting it out there so that the main focus may be in Flint, but that my readers will see that it's happening in many other places as well. So I tried to do that as much as I could in the book, so I can represent everybody.
Yeah, so that was one of my favorite parts about the book, that you connected all of these different places in one crisis. Can you tell me a little bit more about your connection to it as a child and talking about your mom?
My mom was my Girl Scout leader. She started out as physician's assistant, so she was health oriented. And she was active in our community to some extent, but not terribly, not on a huge scale. She didn't run for office. She wasn't involved politically, but in my town, we were deciding about fluoridation in the water at the time, and there was a lot of back and forth about that. So my mom was one of the people that pursued that and looked at it a little bit more closely. And basically, she took me around. I was young. She took me around to sign petitions, have petitions signed door to door, and help inform people. So she basically taught me how our voice is important and how that we should always be there to raise our voices, no matter what we believe. And even as a child, that she taught me that my voice mattered. And I know my readers also have the capability of doing a lot, no matter what their age is and no matter where they live. So I wanted to instill that on them, the lesson that I learned.
So, how has that lesson carried out throughout your life?
As you can see, if you look at my books overall, you can see that I definitely have a wide range of interests about the planet. I started being focused on endangered species when I was a kid. Those were the news stories that would keep me up at night about endangered species. And then I went to work on Audubon magazine for a year when I was in college. And I really started to follow a lot of different stories. And those really stayed with me. And they're really in all of my books. That said, as much as I like to raise my voice and help others to raise their voices and let them know that they can make a difference, there's a lot of issues that are scary. And what I try to do is balance that with a lot of hope, because I know I need that, and I'm sure my readers do too. So I try to carry that with me through all my books and in everything that I do. So there's a little bit of that in everything. So there's like this is a book that's pretty heavy. It's talking about some pretty tough things going on, but I think it's important to learn about these things in a safe place and to be able to see how we can make change.
So tell me about the research process that went into this book.
Well, the research was long. I visited a lot of places. Very often when I do these books, I try to travel to as many places as I can. That is, often constrained by different things, time, money, just sometimes where they are. But in the story of seeds, for example, I was able to travel all the way to Russia for that book to go to a place that was important. So for this book, I did that too. I traveled to a lot of these places and really tried to stay there for a while to get to know the people that were involved and get to hear their stories. So it was, I should say, 2019, 2018 was a lot of travel. Of course, all of that has stopped. And I'm very glad that I had so much of that under my belt, really going into this book and going into the editing process. But it took a while, even for the editing, to get all of that. There was a lot of phone calls when I couldn't go to places. And, I start off with every book that I ever work on. I usually start off with a library visit. I usually start off by looking and searching for like everything that's been written about the topic. For this book, since so much of it is current, it's really going through every type of news media, but not just our news media in the United States. It was going through news media throughout the world. And that was another whole avenue there of reading and getting some things translated and whatnot, to find those local stories that are across the world that we don't hear about in our news every day. So it was a little bit broader than some of my research for my other books, and took a little bit more detective work, which is fun, actually.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about those travels. What was something that really inspired you, and what was that experience like?
Well, I have to say, for this particular book, I wouldn't say my thinking has changed, but it broadened my world. It widened my view of the world. Because I spent so much time with folks that were having challenges with water issues. It opened my eyes to unfortunately, a lot of injustice that was happening, a lot of communities that were really hurting. So that was inspiring from the aspect of seeing their resilience and seeing how caring they were about other communities. For example, I spent a week in Flint, and that was a challenging experience for so many reasons. The water still wasn't safe when I was there, and it was a difficult place to maneuver around because of it. But to see the young activists and was extremely inspiring to me, to see that people in such adversity can come across with such hope and such resiliency was wonderful. And then to come out after that and visit a community that's closer to me in Hoosick Falls, New York, in upstate New York, and find that a group of moms from Flint, Michigan had traveled all the way to Hoosick to talk to those moms that had been impacted by PFOA poisoning, to share their stories and to help them deal with those issues. That was inspiring for me to see how these different crises can bring people together at the worst of times and bring out the best in us, I think is inspiring.
So throughout these travels, was there one story that you heard that really stuck with you?
Well, I'll admit, the one story that stuck with me the most was the story of Jasmine McBride in Flint. She ended up passing away just a few months after I visited with her, so that was particularly hard at the time to go through that and see how the crisis impacted her, and then we lost her. So the stories of folks like that were really really difficult, to deal with, and they do stick with you. But there's also the story of Gitanjali Rao, who developed the lead testing kit, who's a middle schooler. That stuck with me, because here's a middle schooler who's sitting in Colorado watching the news, as we all do, right? Sitting in our homes, in our comfortable homes, watching the news, watching somebody else go through these issues. And she came up with something that's going to possibly impact everybody. And to see that a teenager can do that from her house and be inspired to create something so wonderful and was fabulous. So there's these stories of sadness and hardship, but they are also balanced with these wonderful, hopeful, inspiring stories.
So with all of the research that you did, was there something that you learned that you were really surprised by?
Just the different processes that that go into, like, how many gallons that we use for making a t-shirt, those kind of statistics were just jaw-dropping, and how much water we actually use. And then to think also, so that was, all of those statistics were always jaw-dropping to me. And I would, sit there, like right now I'm wearing, my Flint Matters t-shirt, and I'm thinking, like, how many gallons were used to make this t-shirt, and to grow the cotton, to dye the cotton, to make the fibers. So all of those statistics were always staggering. But the other thing I found that was on the hardship end, that was difficult to learn, was that every time these people anywhere have a problem with their water, whether their tap runs dry, like in New Hampshire, when the Anthonys lost their water after they had just moved into their home, and then they didn't have water, they just kept putting wells in and there was nothing. Or the folks in Flint, or the folks in Hoosick, that once a house doesn't have any water, they lose all of their equity in the home. They can't sell the home. It's worth nothing. And that's mind-boggling, because you think of all of the water crises we've had across the country or across the world, and you think how many people, they can't afford to move, and they're just kind of stuck in that spot. Is just mind-boggling. But again, it's all of this balance of these stories of hardship with these stories of invention and creation and activism. So I tried to put it all in there.
Yeah. So how do you hope to motivate the younger generation to start acting on these issues and to start fixing them?
It's interesting. I was asked in an interview recently, why should young people be concerned about climate change? And my response was, I believe they already are. I believe that when I do school visits in many areas, whether they're virtual or in person, even before, years ago, I did a book on climate change and the environment. And I can remember when I first did this, and I guess it was like 2008, the book came out. I do a school visit, and I would have to tell the students what climate change was and describe why we know it, everything about it. And for the last few years, I mean, I go anywhere and everybody is completely knowledgeable, and the student population is active, and I see tremendous activism already. So what I hope with the book that this will be a tool in their toolbox that they can open and use as a resource. There's information in the back on different things that they can do, different organizations that they can join. There's very simple things. Like, one of my favorite things, when I started to actually, when I'm talking about food, but I'm talking about clothing, how much water is used for these different things that we do every day. We eat and we dress in our clothing, how much water we use. It's it's such an easy thing to start to just watch our clothing. Maybe shopping a little less, maybe having some clothing swaps, maybe depending on what you're doing, washing your clothes in detergents that are biodegradable and more healthier for our environment. There's so many different, just on the clothing issue, what teens can do right off the bat. And so I tried to put as many things as I could in the back of the book that jumpstart that activism.
So if you had one message for your readers, what would it be?
I would hope that my readers will find out a little bit, that this book will inspire them to find out a little bit more about their own water. I hope that they will use this as the tool to be able to explore their own water, discover how they can be a little bit more conscious of the water that they use in their lives, and hope to spread the word a little bit to others. I can remember years ago, my daughter convinced me, talked to me about the fact that I shouldn't leave the water running when I brush my teeth. And it's such a simple thing. And it took my daughter to tell me that, a few years ago. And I listened and I changed my habit. And I hope that whoever my readers are, whoever they are talking to, will listen to them and will hopefully make change in the world and go forward.
So Nancy, what's next for you after this book?
Well, I'm excited to say I have 2 more books coming out this year. The next book that comes out is coming out this summer, and it's part of the Scientists in the Field series from used to be Houghton Mifflin, now it's called Clarion, and it's called The Wolves and Moose of Isle Royale. And it's an exciting story about how wolves are being introduced to the national park, which is an island in the Great Lakes. And it's a story of ecosystem recovery. This next book that comes out will come out in the fall, and it's called Buildings That Breathe. And I know that's like, what? Buildings that breathe? Yeah, so it's an exciting book. And that actually took me to Italy to explore these amazing towers that are designed by an Italian architect named Stefano Boeri, who is making tree scrapers. And now they're all over. There's a whole tree city in China, and they're in Mexico and all over Europe. And they basically clean the air for us. They actually have numbers on how much oxygen they emit and how much carbon dioxide they take in. So it's fun. And of course, it's an extremely fun, positive urban greening story about what's happening in architecture around the world and how we can make our cities a little bit more livable.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. It was a pleasure to interview you today.
Well, thanks so much.
This amazing book not only informs us on the very prominent and worrying water crisis that is happening right now, but also includes ways you can help stop it. So make sure to get your copy of When the World Runs Dry at Novel Neighbor so you too can help save the world.